Hello my dear friends, you're in the Military Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on the 1st of August of 2024. Today we have a lot of very interesting updates, so let's start. And telling the truth, the most important political events, of course, is the F-16s above the Ukraine, in the sky above the territory of Ukraine. This is very important, very interesting. And of course, the prisoner exchange process between Russia, Belarus and the Western countries. So, you know that these two events are very connected with each other, and telling the truth, the story about F-16s appeared right before the Western countries and Russia reported about this prisoner exchange process. So you might say, what are the connections between these two things? But before we get answer to this question, let's discuss everything in details. First, let's talk about once again about F-16s. Today we got report, and furthermore we got some photos, not videos but photos about of F-16s flying in the sky above the territory of Ukraine. This is the first photo that we got today, and this is the second photo that we got today also from Lvov. Later there was even a video that shows the fly of F-16s above the, let's call it, the capital of Western Ukraine. This building furthermore was geolocated. This is the building that's where the somebody from this city captured F-16 in its camera. And furthermore, the Western sources and Ukrainian sources reported that F-16 also was involved for the first time in real combat in the special military operation. And according to information we have, according to the Telegraph, Ukraine has already used F-16s as air defense. These were the first combat sorties that was stated by the Telegraph. So once again, what is the connection between F-16s and the prisoner exchange? Let's discuss now the prisoner exchange process. According to information we have, Turkish intelligence says that their operation to exchange 26 prisoners from seven countries took place in Ankara with its mediation. 10 of those released as a part of the exchange in Ankara are heading to Russia, 30 to Germany and 3 to the United States, the Turkish channel NTV reported. Among those exchangers in Ankara are prisoners held in prisons in 7 countries: Russia, the United States, Germany, Poland, Slovenia, Norway and Belarus, Turkish intelligence reported. They include Americans Evan Gershakovich and Paul Whelan. So what is the situation with this prisoner exchange? First of all, few important things. First of all, this is the first prisoner exchange process since the beginning of the special military operation without participation of Ukrainian side. And this is the first thing. The second thing, when talking about those who Russian released or those who were released by the Western countries, there were no Ukrainians, there were no Ukrainian officers or those who were interested for Ukraine, which confirms from these two perspectives that Ukrainians until the last hours didn't know that there is such a process. And this is the third important point about this process, that there is a process. It's just a point that there is a process, some process, and maybe this is not the last, not the only process between Western countries, Russia and Belarus about the situation in the world, and furthermore about Ukraine. So this is the third important point. And now we are going to move to the final point. And once again, this is the reason why Ukrainians began spreading the information about F-16s, because they were trying, by showing F-16s above Ukraine, by telling that F-16s was involved in its first combat and many other things, to break the media sphere and to break the news about exchange, and to make this piece of news about F-16s is the headliner, as a headliner. But as I understand, the Ukrainians haven't managed to do this. And the final point, let's take a look at this prisoner exchange process once again. There is a very big number of people who were exchanged. We are talking not about the process, one-on-one process of exchange, 2-on-2 or 3-on-3. When talking about 26 prisoners, for me, the first opinion, the first idea that came to my mind, that it was the process like all for all. Not like once again, 1-on-1, 2-on-2, but it was like all for all. The Russians are giving everybody to the Western countries, and the Western countries are giving everybody to Russia. And now let's ask ourselves one important and simple question. From history, from the previous experience, when usually countries or enemies were conducting the prisoner exchange process like all for all? And the answer to this question is simple. Usually enemies or countries or parties of any countries of conflicts conducting such a kind of process only in the end of the conflict, or before the end, or before the negotiations. So this is another reason why the Ukrainians began spreading the information about F-16s, because they understand, and that there are a lot of people who can understand this as well, that Western countries and Russia made a prisoner exchange process all for all, and this is like a step of a goodwill before the beginning of the negotiation, or at least at the end of this stage of the special military operation. And due to this activity of official Kiev, we see that they are completely disagree with this situation. They are completely disagree with the exchange process, and the most important, they are completely disagree about any negotiations between Western countries and Russia without the participation of Zelensky. So this is the main point, and this is obviously a breaking point in the special military operation and in the security and discussion of the security of the future world. Now let's move to the ground and let's talk about the situation along the line of combat contact. And first we're going to talk about Sumy area. Today we got a very interesting report that against the background of the expected offensive of the Russian army in the Sumy direction by the armed forces of Ukraine, the armed forces of Ukraine dismantled signs with the names of the settlements at the entrances and exits to the agglomeration cities and villages, the names of stops as well as signs indicating the distance to settlements have been removed. So the Ukrainians are trying to make the Russians, of course, blind and to make them deaf if they begin moving through Sumy area. So this is very important step that was conducted by the Ukrainians. Furthermore, according to information we have, since the morning, the Ukrainians began clearing the special forces, the special services of Ukraine began clearing operation in the villages and cities along Sumy area, trying to discover those who support Russia, who help the Russians, and so on. So obviously, the Ukrainians are preparing before the greatest offensive from the Russian side that soon is going to take place in this direction. At least everything indicates that this is going to happen like this. Now let's talk about Kharkiv area. During the previous 24 hours, we haven't received lots of updates. We have just one small change on the ground, and we are talking about Vovchansk citadel. Today, the Ukrainian sources published the video of how they were FPV droning the Russians inside of this area. One of the FPV drops was discovered exactly in this building, which indicates Russian control over this territory. Based on this video, most of the mappers have adjusted their maps. As for other updates, just few videos of how the Russians were bombing and attacking the Ukrainians with FABs, with artillery, with stealth flamethrower systems. But now I don't even understand what exactly the Russians and either the Russians and the Ukrainians are planning to do. Because as for this Tikha, months ago the Ukrainians were using this city for concentration of forces, but now we don't understand what is the purpose of Ukrainians in this side. Maybe the Ukrainians still have some plans, but telling the truth, I'm not sure that Ukrainians are able to get anything from the northern Kharkiv direction. The only thing they can do is to win some time, probably before the end of the United States elections. But regarding the situation in Ankara, in Turkey, with the prisoner exchange, we saw that United States of America also took part in this process. So most likely the United States of America are now more to start negotiations than to support and continue the war in Ukraine. Now let's move to the northern Kupiansk direction. We have very interesting details from this area. Now probably the 10th time in a row, for the 10th time in a row, the Russians destroy and bomb the dam over Oskol River, and this is the only update from this direction. So of course it caused some damage to Ukraine logistic, but obviously the Ukraine logistic hasn't been ruined by this. Now let's go to the Seers area. We have lots of very interesting updates from the Seers direction. Today the Russian sources published very interesting video. This is the video I'm talking about. In this video, let's wait for a little. In this video, we can see the Russian attack first. The Russians were bombing the Ukrainian positions in Perezhne. The Russians were bombing the Ukrainian forces along the railways. And according to the author of this video, this is the beginning of the greatest Russian assault operations towards the village. And as a result of this operation, the Russians managed to establish significant control, and some sources are saying that even to enter Perezhne itself. So it's very difficult to understand what exactly was happening, but anyway, we see some episodes of movements of Russian armored vehicles. We see some heavy clashes along some tree lines in the fortifications. By the way, most of these episodes were geolocated during the day. And once again, summarizing everything, the Russians managed to break through and to capture significant territories according to this video. Now let's return to map. The Russian artillery preparation took place exactly in this area, and the episode with very heavy clashes took place in this area. So the Russians, according to the video, managed to enter almost Perezhne from this direction, from this area, but according to geolocations in the video, the main clashes were taking place here. Anyway, as you can see, we have adjusted the map before this video. This territory, let's add the territory to map. This territory used to be under complete Ukraine control, but now we let's say colored this area. We removed any color from this area, showing this territory as a contested area. We don't know for sure what exactly is happening there right now, but once again, most likely the Russians managed to break through the Ukraine defense belt and to enter Perezhne itself along this line. So maybe something like this took place during the previous few days. Now let's move further. Let's talk about Chavara. There are still very heavy clashes exactly in the central part of the city. Today we got additional video of how the Russians were crossing Seversky Donetsk-Donbass Canal, how the Russians brought additional reinforcement in this area, how the Russians landed between the buildings and began clearing the trenches. We see Ukraine FPV drone who was attacking the Russians, so obviously the clashes were very heavy. According to geolocations, the Russians moved along this road. The Russian armored personnel carrier got to this line. The Russian infantry landed in this area and began clearing the forest of Orlova. So this is the situation that was described by the video we've just seen, and this video doesn't show us additional progress of armored forces of Russian Federation. We see no changes on the ground, but this is 100% confirmation that the Russians do have foothold on the Ukrainian side of Seversky Donetsk-Donbass Canal. But as we see, no progress, no additional goals, no additional gains. Now let's talk about New York agglomeration. As for Toretsk, during the previous 24 hours, we haven't received anything, and we don't know for sure whether the Russians managed to improve their pincers, let's say in the south of Zalizna and in the northern part of Zalizna. Most likely the Russians managed to do this, but we need additional videos, additional updates. Maybe tomorrow we're going to receive some changes on the ground. As for New York, according to information we have, the Russians managed to improve their positions in the central part, and the Russians achieved significant results. They managed to cut one of the most supply roads that the Ukrainians were using to support New York. This is very important progress by the Russians. Let's discuss this in details, because the Ukrainians were able, let's say a week ago, to supply their forces in the central part of New York using this road. This road was going from New York to Sukhaya Balka, then to Romanovka, then to N220 roads, and after along to N20 road, they were able to get inside of Kostiantynivka. So that was one of the most important roads that Ukrainians were using to support their forces. Of course, you might say that that was not the only road that Ukrainians have. Of course, there are lots of roads that goes to the north, but the problem is that since during July, the Russians managed to destroy lots of bridges exactly in this area. For example, in this video, we can see the consequences or the result of the Russian attack on the bridge. And as a result of attack, as you can see, the Russians destroyed the bridge that Ukrainians were using for supplying and supporting their forces, as well as in Toretsk and New York. So basically, since the beginning for the previous months, the Russians managed to reduce the quality of Ukraine logistic. The N20 road was cut by the Russians physically. The roads that goes from the south to the north were also cut by missile strike. The bridges were destroyed. So maybe there are few roads left, but most of them are under complete Russian FPV drone control or Lancet control or artillery control. So the Ukrainians do have significant problems in this direction, not just on the ground, but also with logistic. Furthermore, according to information we have, the Russians continue moving to the west in direction of Alexandropol and Kostiantynivka. And if we calculate the distance between edge Russian positions and the villages, the current distance is less than 2 kilometers. So most likely during the next few days, the Russians will begin assault operation with the purpose to capture these two villages. And if the Russians are able to do this, they will be able to cut a logistic once again in the area of Sukhaya Balka and Valentinovka. Now let's talk about Pakrovsk direction. We have very interesting reports. In the previous video we were talking about Russian progress in Timofeyevka, Veselaya, in Zhelanne, among the fields, Ivanovka, and by the evening we got the first geolocations that confirms almost complete control by the Russians over the village of Veselaya. In this video we can see the Ukrainian FPV drones who were attacking the Russian forces inside of the village. Before we continue with this video, I would like to point your attention on this building. Take a look at this building. They have no damage. As you can see, completely normal buildings without any damage as a result of Russian offensive operation. These buildings were given up by the Ukrainians without even small resistance. As you can see, they are completely normal, and now the Russians managed to capture them, and now the Ukrainians of 47th Brigade are forced to clear mistakes of the previous brigades that were responsible maybe for this direction. As you can see, as a result of strike, one of the buildings was destroyed, and this exactly what the Russians should have captured in this village. Completely ruins, but not a normal village. So based on this video, there were a few more episodes of FPV drone strikes. Most of them took place exactly in this area, and based on this video, most of the mappers have updated their maps by adding additional territory under complete Russian control. Now let's move further. We have unconfirmed report about complete control of Timofeyevka. As I understand, the Minister of Defense of Russian Federation will give us additional updates about the situation tomorrow, that the Russians captured Veselaya and secured Timofeyevka as well. Anyway, significant progress. And as for Timofeyevka, the biggest value of this direction is that the Russians managed to reduce the distance between edge Russian positions and N32 road itself. According to this configuration, the distance between N32, the main supply road between Pakrovsk and Konstantinovka, is less than 6 kilometers, so 5 kilometers and 500 meters, which is already nothing for artillery and for FPV drones. So we can say that there is a certain control over the road already. We still haven't received any video that shows us the movement of force or FPV drone strikes, but as I understand, there are already such events, such cases, but we just haven't received the details. As for Ivanovka, as you can see, Ivanovka is already semi-encircled by the Russians from the southwest, southeast, and of course from the eastern direction, and most likely during the next few days the Russians will make first attempts to attack this village as well. I'm not sure that the Ukrainians are going to show any resistance in this area as well. They will basically abandon their positions as they did in Veselaya and many other villages on this direction. As for Zhelanne, if you remember the last report about additional Russian progress along the railways, we got probably 3 or 4 days ago. After that, there were no updates about additional Russian gains towards Zhelanne. But today we got additional progress, as you can see, and according to information we have, the Russians currently have 2 entrance points in Zhelanne, one from the northwest, another one from the northeast, 2 entrance points, and this is already very good for the Russian forces, how to take under control this village with less resistance from the Ukrainian side. And we have additional progress by the Russians in the fields between Novosilovka, Persh and Zhelanne itself. So the Russians are moving. For now, we haven't received geolocations that can confirm this, but as I understand, with Zhelanne, with Veselaya, sooner or later we're going to receive them. Now let's move further. Let's talk about Krasnogorovka. After the Russians established complete control over the main and the central part of the city, the Russians moved their focus to the fields between Krasnogorovka, Georgievka and Marinka itself. If you remember, yesterday we were talking about the Russian attempts to clear the fields with demining equipment, but the Ukrainians managed to first of all discover and then to destroy the Russian tanks, and the Russians suffered significant losses. The tank was destroyed as a result of FPV drone strike. This video was published yesterday, and today we got additional batches of the videos from this direction of how the Russians were attacking and storming Ukrainian positions. In this video we can see how the Russians were bombing this stronghold. Obviously we start receiving more and more the actions, the Russian activity intensified in this direction, which confirms about Russian goals and what the Russians are planning to do next. The Ukrainians from their side published few videos of how they were FPV droning the Russian abandoned tanks. This is very funny and weird video. In this video we can see Ukrainian drones who were flying above the Russian T-64 modernized tanks, and these are models of late 2023 or early 2024, because they have additional anti-drone shields, anti-drone barriers, defense, and just abandoned tank was destroyed by FPV drones without any resistance. So anyway, we see some activity, and according to information we have, according to different mappers, the Russians also improved their positions from the coal mine towards the same rich network of the fortification. So the Russians are attacking from many directions, and most likely the Russians are about to begin pressure from the northeast as well. So as we discussed in the previous updates, in the previous videos, Russia's main goal to establish control over everything that located below this red line. Now let's talk about Kostiantynivka. Probably this is the most weird direction of the special military operation, because for the previous 4 days the Russians conducted I'm not saying hundreds, but tens maybe attempts to attack Kostiantynivka itself, and according to geolocations and according to videos we received, the Russians were using hundreds of armored vehicles. And correct me if I'm wrong, but the videos that we could see from this direction for the previous 4 days tell us that the Russians began the greatest, the biggest tank attack, the biggest armored vehicle attack ever since the beginning of the special military operation in this direction. Hundreds of tanks. Most of the videos were published by the Ukrainian sources, so that's why we can see lots of destroyed vehicles, or at least damaged vehicles, by the Ukrainian sources. We don't have videos that show us how the Ukrainians were attacking Russian infantry. Sometimes some tanks, most of them were abandoned. Anyway, the most important that the Russians were using hundreds of tanks. For example, this video was published today of how the Russians were attacking the Ukrainians along the line Novomikhailivka-Konstantinovka. This video, for example, was published yesterday on the 31st of July. In this video we can see the same. Tens of tanks, armored vehicles, personal carriers. Some of them were destroyed as a result of FPV drone strikes, some of them were destroyed as a result of artillery strike, and many other different episodes. And this road to attack took place exactly along this line. Also, yesterday we got, not yesterday, but on the 30th of July, the day before yesterday, we got the video that was published by 33rd Mechanized Brigade, and here we can see the same story. Tens of Russian tanks, armored vehicles, infantry were heading towards Konstantinovka through Pobeda. Once again, lots of casualties, lots of losses, a lot of destroyed vehicles, and these roads of attack took place somewhere here. So the Russians were attacking like this. And yesterday we got the video how the Russians were attacking through Pobeda towards the main defense belt of armored forces of Ukraine to the north of Konstantinovka. Once again, tens of tanks, armored vehicles, personal carriers. Once again, lots of losses, lots of casualties, lots of destroyed vehicles. And these roads of attack took place something like this. So summarizing everything, don't forget about the Russian activity in the southern part. We have lots of videos of Russian sabotage and reconnaissance group that were working towards the road 0524. So we can summarizing everything, we can include these roads of attack as well. So summarizing everything, we can make a conclusion that the Russians used hundreds of tanks, maybe thousands of soldiers for the previous 5 days to establish complete control over the village, and the Russians suffered loss, at least based on Ukrainian geolocations and Ukrainian videos. The Russians keep silence about this issue. They haven't provided us anything about this situation. But I'll remind you one important statement. I'll remind you that we need to increase the numbers of updates for these purposes. Since the beginning of July, it will help us. Yes, this is it. Gerasimov on the this video was published. I don't see when exactly the video was published. Probably I'm not sure when exactly. Anyway, somewhere in July, probably in the middle of July, the head of Russian army, the commander-in-chief Gerasimov, visited the group of forces east, the group that is responsible exactly for Konstantinovka direction. He inspected this group, and a few weeks after this visit, the Russians began this full-scale operation. Now, obviously, all these things, all these events are just the parts of the same puzzle. Most likely, he visited the group of forces east to inspect and to understand whether the group is ready for final push towards Konstantinovka. Probably, he got lots of information. He inspected the group. He gave the commanders the final orders, and the final orders for this direction are simple: to take under control this part of Konstantinovka itself, these fields, and to collapse and to defeat the Ukrainians in this area completely, and to make Konstantinovka frontline collapsed. So obviously those were the orders and the final words of Gerasimov, and after that we see this significant number of attacks. But the problem is that according to Ukrainians, most of them were repelled. The Russians managed to improve their positions. The Russians managed to get very close to the city, and some sources are saying that this red line is the current situation around Konstantinovka, so it's already like a cauldron. But maybe these talks are just rumors and wishful thinking. Anyway, Konstantinovka's final battle has begun, and we'll see whether the Russians are able to do this or not. Urozhaina, after a very short operational pause, the Russians resumed their attempts to move further in the northern direction, and they began with the Toslem throwing the Ukrainian positions along TO5-18 road. They start bombing the nearest Ukrainian positions. Most likely, maybe this night, they will start the movement along these three lines in direction of Velika Novosilovka. Zaporozhye, we haven't received anything important, just regular military activity. And Kherson, we got just one interesting video how the Russians managed to discover the positions of Ukrainian air defense systems, radars, command center, and as a result of Iskander strike or Ha-59 or 35 missile strike, this command center with the launching system was destroyed. Furthermore, by the way, the Ministry of Defense of Russian Federation during the previous report stated that they managed to destroy 3 HIMARS systems. Maybe the Russians will publish some videos in the very near future, and we'll see where exactly these HIMARS systems were destroyed. And that's it for today. Military Summary channel reminds we condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for your watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.